Okay. Hi, Berna. How are you?
I'm awesome, Douglas. Very excited to be here. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to have you here. And we're going to be talking about your book, Money Out Loud, all the financial stuff no one taught us. Is this your first book, or have you written other books?
This is my first book, as this has been a dream of mine since I was very young. And I would not have expected to write a money book, though, when I was younger. So it's pretty different.
What else do you do with your life besides this book?
Well, currently my life is this book. But before and around this book, I am a financial educator. I actually started off with all of this creating videos on the internet, on Instagram and on YouTube. And then it sort of blew up into a podcast and now the book. Outside of that, I am an auntie. I am obsessed with my nieces. I am a dancer. I'm a first gen Filipino-American daughter of immigrants with lots of friends and lots of family back home in the Bay Area. And I just like to kick it with them and ask them not to ask me money advice unless they buy my book.
So, before the book, you were doing content creation about
Yes.
finance? Like,
hmm
well, some of the stuff I've seen, like, how to manage your money and tips on financial tips, things like that on YouTube, probably.
Yes. I started off on YouTube and then I moved to Instagram and a little bit on TikTok now. And mostly my videos are essentially walking through the things that I'm learning right in that moment. So I started off doing videos about budgeting because I had just figured out a budgeting system for myself and I wanted to share it with folks. And then I wanted to share my debt payoff plan, how I paid off. First, it was $12,000 of credit card debt. And then I paid off all of my $50,000 of student loans, built my first emergency savings. And then I built a savings with my partner at the time to quit our jobs and travel the world. So just content creating around that. And more recently, it's been about sort of money and culture, money and being a first gen daughter of immigrants, money and our feelings and our emotions. So it's gotten a little more complex.
Okay, one of your talking points that I want to dive right into says the first and most important lesson we should all learn about money. Before you answer, I just want to say that it's been my experience meeting with people that there's always those people that seem to have money and the ones that seem to not have money.
Yes,
And the ones that have
100.
had money always have had money, like even as a
hmm
kid. And then the,
hmm
the ones that don't have money, when they're 70, they still don't have money. I mean, I know
Oh
that's
yeah,
a generalization, but I've seen that more and more. So, what is the first and most important lesson?
I think the first and most important lesson is actually the very first chapter of my book. I call it unpacking your money story. And it's exactly what you're talking about, Douglas. There is a sort of narrative about money that we see in other people and that we have in and of ourselves. But a lot of the time, we'll get to adulthood, for example, and we have credit card debt or student loan debt. And the story we're telling ourselves about money is I'm just bad at money. I'm bad at saving. I got into this debt because I don't know, how to manage my money. And that's not the full story. That might be true to you, but it's not the full story. So the very first thing that I walk people through is asking themselves and kind of like time traveling, go back in the past and think about your very first experiences with money. The reason I ask this is because it's very much connected to the way that you manage money now and how you got to where you are. There is a University of Cambridge study that says that our sort of financial foundation, our habits, are set between the ages of 7 and 9, which is so wild.
Wow.
And so, yes, and that's not to say like it's the only window we have, and that's you need to be teaching kids between that age and that's it. But a lot of us were not learning about money between the ages of 7 and 9. Like we weren't doing like budgeting flashcards between the ages of 7 and 9. So I want folks to unpack what was it they were learning about money and how. What was your first memory about money that was positive? When's the first time money made you happy? When's the first time money made you upset? When's the first time you realized money affected your family? Or when's the first time you realized, oh, exactly what you were saying, Douglas? When's the first time you realized some people have more than me, some people have less? Those memories will add up to the way that you review your money now and the way that you spend and the way that you save. And it's super important to kind of identify that.
Do people that have a lot of money have to be cheap, have to be misers? Is that a rule? No?
Oh, no, not at all. I think there is no have to be. I don't think there's any kind of hard and fast rules. The way that I approach money is I just want you to feel in control of your money. There are people with a lot of money that feel completely out of control. There are people with very little money that feel completely in control. It's money and emotions are very, very, very intertwined. And our emotions don't always add up to how much money we actually have. So that's why you see so many folks who are considered wealthy and deeply unhappy, or it's very connected. And so you have to unpack for yourself what your money habits are, what your money story is, and what that narrative is. Because if you want to change it, if you want to change where you're going, you need to know where you're coming from. You might be like, oh, I've been an impulse buyer all my life. All I do is spend, like I can't keep a paycheck. Somebody taught you that. Somebody showed that behavior to you. Maybe it was like a love language of theirs too. Maybe it's the way that they showed you affection. Or if you're like, oh, I am a miser. I keep things very strict. It's all very scarcity. I'm very frugal. Somebody taught you that too. Or maybe you experienced the opposite and your child brain was like, I'm going to do the exact opposite because I don't want to end up that way. Either way, there's a narrative in there that could be very worth unpacking if you want to change it.
Do you think that the technology and online shopping and all of that has sort of amplified the instant gratification for a lot of people? Oh, I can just go
Oh,
online in a few clicks and it's on its way. Amazon's coming.
Oh, yeah, and that's very much on purpose, especially when it comes to retailers like the Amazons. They understand that now money is no longer a thing that leaves our hands and leaves our wallets necessarily. It's imaginary. It's in the cloud. It's just digits. It's just numbers. And so retailers are trying to make it as absolutely easy as possible to take your money. And now you have things like Klarna and Afterpay, where if you can't afford it, it's okay. Like now you have payment plans for like a pair of shoes. You have payment plans. You can get a payment plan for like a cup of coffee. All these things are meant to take money out of your hands as quickly as possible. I think that's why financial education is so important, especially for young folks, because it's easier than ever to spend. It's easier than ever to get into debt, not just from how easy it is to spend, but it's also because life is getting more expensive. Inflation can't be stopped. Wages stagnant. Racial wealth gap, gender wealth gap getting bigger. So there are so many forces at play that want you to be bad at money, essentially, and it's a lot to fight against.
Let me hit another one of your talking points here. We've got about 5 minutes. Some baby steps that the financially fearful can take to break the cycle and start building wealth. What's the first baby step?
Definitely the first baby step was, as I was saying, unpacking your money story, right? And an interesting thing that I share with folks in the book, I haven't talked about very much, is it's not just asking yourself those questions, but if you can and you have access to the folks who raised you or that you were around, you can ask them those questions too, because it's really interesting to hear the perspective of the people who raised you and their thoughts on money. For example, I ask my parents those money questions. I literally interview them in the book. And what I learned was so revealing to me about my own spending habits. It made me just feel what I call financial empathy. I'm like, oh, that's why I am the way that I am. And that's why my money moves the way that it moves. It's not just because I'm dumb or bad at it. It's because this was taught to me. That's one baby step. The second baby step, I go right into budgeting. And budgeting, as I always say, is an ugly word for a beautiful thing. It's organizing your money and making up your own rules about your money. And those rules can very much change. I want folks to give every single dollar that they get a specific job. That's what budgeting is. You might be giving it, the job of like, you go towards my needs, you go towards my wants, you go towards my financial goals. As long as you're being intentional about your money and you're sort of resetting those intentions and checking on those intentions every time you get a new paycheck, that's budgeting. That's a massive baby step, really, to answering so many financial questions people have.
How do people who are living paycheck to paycheck, how can they possibly save money?
That is a really important part of financial education that I think if you're listening to lots of TikTokers or Instagram people about money, they'll try to convince you that money is entirely mindset, which it's not. I got out of debt. I got out of my $50,000 of debt, of course, using tips and tricks that made it go faster. I simply earned more money than I used to. When you have more money every month than you actually spend, that's how you pay off debt. If you're earning only as much as you need to survive or even less, you can't pay off debt. It's just the math does not work out. And we have to get very real with ourselves. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't get out of debt easily. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't build a savings. It's full on, the math doesn't work. And so, in terms of financial education, you might need to focus entirely on building your income before you tackle any other financial situation. Like, there's a lot of forces out there who are going to try to convince you that it's all your mindset and it's all in your brain. It's not, it's math. If you just need to earn more money, focus on your income.
What do you tell people who see the national debt at $31 trillion or something like that? And they say, well, okay, so what? I owe 20 grand, I owe 30 grand. The country is 31 trillion in debt. What do you tell people who use that argument to stay in debt?
Honestly, I've tried to take the perspective that debt is not necessarily a bad thing. I think we were taught through so many financial educators for so many years, you should be ashamed of your debt. You should try to get rid of all of it as soon as possible. If you had debt, you're a bad person and your financial life sucks. And I think that's simply not true. If it wasn't for our access to things like credit and debt, a lot of marginalized people would have never gone to college, would have never gotten a secondary education. A lot of marginalized people would not survive without debt. And so I don't ever want to put shame on people for having debt. I also know a lot of people who are like, listen, I have a $20,000 student loan and I could pay it off if I wanted to, but I would actually get a better return on my money if I invest it in the market in this certain way, if I invested in this business. And, they're like, what I'm paying on interest in debt is actually less than what I would earn if I were to invest that money. And that makes me feel good. And I'm like, great. As long as you are making financial decisions that feel right to you and feel aligned and you feel in control, I really can't judge. But I especially don't want to judge from a place of like, debt is bad, because that's just not true.
I think that there are people who think like that. I know my grandfather did. He wouldn't even
Yes,
take a mortgage on his house.
sure,
You
of
know,
course. And
it was
that's what we're
cash was
learning.
everything. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the kind of things that we learn and get passed down to us. And a lot of the times we learn those lessons without questioning them. Like I'm grateful for my debt. My debt got me to college. It got me living in New York for a while and like just rebuilt my life. And debt is also, it's an absolute necessity for a lot of marginalized folks. You won't survive. Like you couldn't like pay a hospital bill without debt. You couldn't get healthcare without debt. You couldn't like access safe housing and food without getting into debt. We punish ourselves mentally for debt. And I mean, to be fair, it's a scary thing. It can be very intimidating. So I can understand why folks like your grandfather are like, I would rather avoid it entirely. That is your choice. But when folks are trying to navigate debt in and out of it, the judgment really does not help. It's really a matter of making the choice that's right for you.
Well, I think on that note, we're going to have to wind this down. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
The book is called Money Out Loud, and the author is Berna Anat. I know I'm saying that probably wrong.
No, you got that.
Is the book out now?
The book is out as of Tuesday, April 25th. My book baby has been born, and you can get it anywhere that you get books. But I really encourage folks to order local and independent because those stores need your money the most.
Okay. Do you have a website you want to give out?
I do, yeah. It's heyberna.com, Heyberna, like hey me, hey Berna. And if you are on social media, you can find me at heyberna, definitely on Instagram and then everywhere else as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you and talking to you. Best of luck with the
Yes.
book.
Thank you so much, Douglas. It's been an honor.